Is this thing on?
Oh,
All right.
yeah, looks like it.
All right, we're recording. Okay, everybody. This is the inaugural episode of Ed and John's Tech Talk Together Tuesday. We're
Tech Talk
on.
Together Tuesday.
Yeah.
Does it work for mine too?
Yeah, well.
Oh yeah, there it goes. Cool.
All right, so what John and I talked about is we want to go talk about the fact that I think it was a week and a half ago now, Lambda hit 10 years. And I was kind of chuckling to myself, reading about and watching some of the videos, going, all these people either helped create it or were saying, "Oh, I remember when it came out." I didn't even know what AWS was 10 years ago. So I think there'll be an interesting juxtaposition. And then we also want to talk about reInvent, which is coming up next week. So this is our kickoff podcast, and we're jumping into some cool things. So,
Yeah.
my name is Ed Meyer. I'm a sales director for BUILDSTR.
John Delgado, Cloud Solutions Architect here at BuildSTR.
All right, John, why don't you kick it off since you're the smart guy in the room? Um, give us the overview of what Lambda is and kind of, if you can remember it, what was your first memory of when you first heard of Lambdas?
So this is the crazy part. 10 years ago, I was still in school 10 years ago. So when I was, man, I was an upper grad or upper level, and so when I was learning about event-driven architectures and different things like that, like our professors were teaching us messaging queues and uh, setting up your applications to process these messaging queues, and then it goes and does things on your on your uh, from your application itself, and that was our version of event-driven architecture back then. But even when I was in school, like we didn't learn too much about infrastructure, unfortunately. And obviously, as time has progressed and I've gotten a lot more experience in different things like that, and like learning about AWS and then learning about public cloud and everything like that, like it's crazy to see how far we've come, even from like the curriculum that they're teaching kids nowadays, and obviously like the certification path, which is super cool to see, right? And so um, now I I can't even fathom not being able to have what we call Lambda, right? Which is like this serverless architecture where you give it code to run and it runs when an event happens, right? And if I remember correctly, there was only a few different things that could trigger a Lambda 10 years ago. And there was only certain programs that could run on a
It,
Lambda,
it started
right?
out
Like
just being or just supporting Node.js, I think, right?
I think you're right. I think it was
Yeah.
Node.js that it started out on, and it was DynamoDB triggers, and maybe shoot, I don't remember what else it started out with 10 years ago.
Yeah, it was very
But
limited. And even in
very
2014,
limited.
I think it was just beta. It didn't go GA until 2015.
Yeah, how crazy is that, right? So we've come a
Yeah.
super long way. Like now it's you can do some pretty complex and cool things with the amount of triggers, the amount of code bases that you can put behind a Lambda. Like
Yep, the scaling.
I've written whole like ETL jobs that like the extract, transform, load jobs that'll take like for example, like you send an email, it'll take that email, drop into an S3 bucket. That S3 bucket triggers a Lambda, which then goes and processes it, does a bunch of cool things, and like I can't even fathom doing that when I was in school 10 years ago, right?
Um,
Like it's so crazy.
you know what? I think that that's like a good thing. Not to try and make this the I mean my show, but it's very parallel to something that happened with me. So when I finished undergrad studying molecular biology at UCLA, great university, they taught us in this molecular biology class, you can take genes from some species, put it into another cell line, so that's called a recombinant protein or recombinant gene, and then grow them. So it's either like bacteria or yeast or insects. And then it just does this like protein factory and you have proteins, and the idea was like you can make a therapy or a biomedicine, but they said you will never be able to make a protein therapeutic from recombinant proteins. 6 months later, my first job was making protein therapeutics in bacteria cells off of a technology that had been proven to be accurate 5 years before that. So this whole idea of what's possible, we have these limitations, and then it's just, the Jeff Barr story from his podcast is he was iterating and talking, and then he threw his hands up in the air and was like, well, what if we could just throw code up into the air? And so there's this kind of like a hope-filled optimism for me that gets, it's like pouring fuel on the fire for the optimism I already have of looking at Lambda as the idea of it and going, whenever we think there's a limitation, there's just a different way of doing it, and it might not be a limitation. So that's exciting for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And oh shoot, I remember even going back to school, right? Like the first whole week of classes are always, okay, let's get your environment set up, let's get your computer set up, and it's like I remember seeing your first system.out.println hello world and like I'm a programmer, right?
Yeah,
Like, and
yeah.
it's mind blowing, right? And then you take that and now you throw a hello world application, for example, onto something because you don't know what's underneath it, right?
Yeah,
And then all of a sudden you get something triggering that application and it's like, what?
yeah,
Groundbreaking, right? And so
yes,
like the amount of time it takes to get your code up into the cloud just significantly reduces, and now you get developers focusing on really what matters to them, which is developing, and they don't
yeah,
have to worry about what's behind it. And I think that really like that's how we got into this whole serverless and managed service landscape today, right? Like it
yes,
truly was groundbreaking if you think about it.
yeah. It look, there's so many things. There's this French, he's not truly a philosopher. He's maybe like a sociologist and he was around in the 20th century. His name's Jacques Ellul, and he wrote a book called I think it's the English translation of it is the Age of Technique or the Age of Technology. And his whole idea is there's this idea of technology and there's this idea of the machine and what drives, at a philosophical level, which is driving the other one. And in the 60s, people were saying, oh, the machine is going to take over and destroy society. And his idea was like, no, 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 the machine is just a byproduct of this thing of technique. Technique has been around, it's perfecting things. And there was a byline in it where he says, as things get more advanced, in order for people to make better changes, they will have to sacrifice their individualism for working with a group. And I've thought about it in a lot of different ways. And the beauty, we say the cloud all the time, right? Well, all the cloud is a hypermassive data center. And so it's this idea of sacrificing our individualism. We don't get to control the hardware per se. Eventually you can choose different specs, but for getting the benefit of scale, for getting the benefit of spinning something up and then spinning it down without having to carry the financial burden of managing. And you also get to share with other people around the world. So it's changing the way we're using resources, electricity, all of the different composite parts that make up the hardware. I think it's a beautiful story when you start thinking about it and pulling it apart.
Yeah, one of my favorite stickers of like all time, or I think memes as the kids would say, right? But it's like it's not the cloud, it's someone else's computer, and it's which I love, right? But like going back to it, right? Like it's so cool to think, hey, I have this computer, I'm not using all of it. Hey, I can give you some of it, I can give you some of it, and you're optimizing and you're eliminating waste. And we go back to like sustainability in our environment because data centers just use a lot of resources. Computers use a lot of resources.
Yeah.
And when we're able to take what we have instead of adding on to it
Yeah.
and like provision it out across multiple tenants. Like, and it's a crazy thing to think about, because I don't think from an on-prem perspective, like having that many data centers across the world and across all the different individual private sector companies, right? Like there'd be no way to do that at scale the way AWS or anyone does that, right? Like,
Yeah. It'd be very hard. It would also be, you would have to only have people working in these hub cities, which, that's how it was for a while.
mhm.
But now you get the ability to have distributed work and then also scale. I think it's cool.
Yeah, and then even accessing it, right? Like the AWS console now, thinking about it, right? Like having all those different APIs and then having a UI on top of all those APIs that makes it so easy to spin up things so fast with a standard. Like there's no way all a bunch of on-prem data centers across the world doing their own things could have that sense of standardization. So yeah, that's more
it's cool.
impressive the more if we go into it.
Well, so also the other thing that I think back to the first time I heard of Lambdas, and I knew nothing at the time. Like literally, I left academia because one of the professors, when he was talking about becoming a tenured professor, he was like, "You see this stack of journal articles? You better fall asleep every night with a stack this thick or thicker on your chest every night." And I was like, "Whoa." Just thinking about postdoc to assistant professor to associate professor to full professor, all of the different, grants you have to write, everything. I was like, I don't love it enough. And then I was like, what the hell I've got 13 years sunk into this biotech and academic world. What do I do now? And a buddy of mine was in consulting, and how do I, once I got into being a data analyst / data engineer in training, I was talking to a friend who was at the company that I was at, and he was developing this kind of POC scalable application. And he was talking to me about, oh, I don't even have to have a server deployed. I just use these Lambdas to trigger each step along the way. And I was like, what the? I don't know what any of that is. I'd never taken any computer science. I didn't know any of it. This was 2016 that he and I were talking about this. And so he was like, I remember him telling me this is going to change the world when you have a serverless event driven application and you can scale things up and scale things down. And I didn't know anything about it, but I just knew this is really amazing and really cool. Little did I know that, whatever 4 years later, I would be focusing everything on learning about AWS and becoming an AWS services sales guy. But that was a transformational moment in 2016, and I didn't know what I didn't know at the time, and I didn't even know how new that was. So it's a cool memory to think back on, knowing we're now at, Lambda's 10 years old.
And I think even in the very beginning, like I think it maxed out at like 5 minutes or something like that.
Oh, really?
And yeah, like now the Lambdas run for a lot longer. So I think it's 15 minutes now. And which is crazy. So people started using it a lot more often in a lot more use cases, right? And people started seeing the value, and then obviously that value brought more use cases, and it's like, well, now we need to increase the functionality and the different things that you can do with it, and now you can run some pretty impressive workloads on Lambdas. So
Yeah,
even seeing the progress that it's come from in that 10 years, right, is impressive.
it is. As you were talking right now, I was reminded of a couple companies ago. I was working with this guy's just like straight mad genius. You talk to some people, you've got this skill set where you've got a sales capability and deep technical skill. So this mad genius that I was working with had the same capability, and a customer had basically been, their AWS account had been hacked, and it was a ransomware attack. So I think it's 43 terabytes of data had been deleted from their system for 0.16 Bitcoin. Like that was the ransom note. Give us 0.16 and we'll return. Well, this genius evil hacker, all they did was just put a delete tag on all of the files in the S3 bucket. So everything was there. But if they were going to recover it manually, like single threaded, it would have taken like 243 days to recover everything. So this was a Thursday night. It was like a panic note. And so my team volunteered. They said, yeah, we'll work over the weekend. So they wrote, it took them about 60 hours to write the code using Lambdas that scanned and removed the delete tag off of, I forget the number of files, but all of the files within the 43 terabytes. It ran through the system 3 times, and the first time it did like a bulk undelete, and then each time it undeleted more, and there wasn't 100% confidence that they got all of it, but it was like 99.999%. So 60 hours to write it. I think it took 3 hours total to run through everything 3 times, and it cost the customer $6.50 of AWS compute to run this multi-threaded Lambda to undelete something that would have taken 240 days. And the only people that knew were the board, the lawyer, and a couple of the IT team and the C-suite for this large company. That's amazing.
Amazing. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I can't even fathom. That's oh my goodness. I don't have any super cool, crazy stories like that, but but I have done some pretty cool things with Lambda. But um I think what impresses me the most about Lambda, with that use case in mind too, is just how versatile it is. Like you can really throw anything you want at it and it just handles it.
Yeah.
You don't have to think about it. It just does. It's like old reliable. It's just like I'm gonna take what you want, I'm gonna do it, and I'm gonna just get it done. Which it's like that IT worker, your senior engineer that's just like, all right, boss, I got you. Like, and that's all any person wants in a company, right?
Yes. Yeah. It's like you don't want a laptop. You want a email interface that always works. You want a word processor that always works. You want a, remote work interface that always works. You don't care about your laptop. You care about your work interface. Same thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Before we move on to talking about reInvent, if you were going to tell somebody who's like, knuckle dragger sales guy level, who's just getting into this, where would you tell them to start? And then if you were talking to if you were talking to yourself, 10 years ago, and you jumped into a time machine and airdropped into now, and you're like, all right, here's what you need to learn to strap this jetpack on and get going. What would you tell the two different knuckle dragger and then time travel genius?
Oh, great question, man. So obviously understanding what the workload is and where you want to go and what you want to accomplish with your workload, right? So again, it does need to be event driven, whether it's through a trigger or like a cron drop, something like that happens at a reoccurring time, right? A predictable workload, right? And or behind an API, for example, like if you want to put it behind an API, right? However, it could get expensive depending on if you have millions of API calls, right? So understanding how many API calls or what workloads you're going to be doing, understanding your architecture, and ultimately the business results, the budgets, and how much like you want to go into depth on the infrastructure, because obviously being serverless, you have less control of the infrastructure, right? And so if you need that fine-tuned controls of exactly what's happening behind the scenes, Lambda might not be the exact tool for you. And also the other limitations like the 15-minute cap for workloads and or a different programming language, for example, if you're writing a very specific programming language that isn't supported by Lambda, right? Those are just some of the examples. But for the most part, like it's as flexible as it is, and if you're doing event-driven architecture, Lambda's, I mean, a very, very popular tool across small, medium, and large organizations across the world. So what I would do if I were to go back 10 years would be to understand all the different use cases for event-driven architecture and understanding the difference between like event-driven architecture and more traditional architecture patterns, as well as like more modern patterns such as containers and different things like that. But just understanding your workloads is going to be the most important part there.
Okay. Yeah, that's a great call out on context. You want to talk about reInvent?
Oh shoot! So it's next week. Man, I'm super excited. I always get excited for reInvent. To be honest with you, I haven't done my research on what's happening or any of the upcoming stuff for next week.
We could talk about the one thing that's happening on Monday night at the Venetian at 4 p.m.
Oh, what's happening?
It's a happy hour being hosted by BUILDSTR and the AWS commercial team.
Oh, snap.
Yep. We're going to be in Sala 118. So if you're in the commercial sector or if you want to come by and say hi, check it out. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn, send me a direct message, and I hate saying DM. It's like it just feels like I'm trying too hard, so I'll just say direct message. Because I don't ever say that in regular life, so I'm not going to say that. So send me a direct message, and then I'll get you the details for it, and we'd love to see you there.
Yeah, super cool. That'd be super cool to go hit you all up at the Venetian and everything. I wish I was in town.
You know what? Next year, you'll be there next year. Do you have any like just general? Because there's going to be people who have never been before. General advice on reInvent.
Oh, great question. So there's a ton of guides out there, absolutely. And there's too much. There's no way you can get to all of it. There's just too much going on. Too many booths, all the different things. So my number one recommendation is going to be wear comfy shoes. You need to absolutely wear comfy shoes for sure.
Yeah.
The next thing is whatever water bottle you're carrying or coffee cup that you're carrying, make sure it has a lid onto it because you don't realize how many people you bump into accidentally, whether you're looking at a booth. And I know it seems like a dumb recommendation, but the last thing you want to do is like spill coffee on a potential client or someone like super or just anybody, right? Like I don't want to spill hot coffee on anybody. And then in addition to that, just have fun. Like there's so many tech talks going on, and go to all the ones that interest you, even if it doesn't seem like something that's up your alley or something. Like I know AI and ML is going to be the talk of the town for anything, but even if it's something that, hey, you have time to kill, this is going on, just stop by, just go have fun and make it to all that you can. And as long as you're sleeping and eating, just have as much fun as possible and be comfortable.
I love that. I've never heard anybody say put a lid on your drink. I wish I had heard that. I can't tell you the number of times where I've like spilled coffee on myself and you're like, God damn it. And you know, so that's a great piece of advice. The other thing that I would say is drink way more water than you think you need and get like pepper in some electrolytes, like non-sugar electrolytes. Or if you're getting Gatorade, water it down significantly. But like lots of water, some good electrolytes, because that in conjunction with your comfy shoes, that's going to be a game changer.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think the other thing, the first massive conference I went to, there were like, I don't know, 30,000 people. And this professor, I bumped into him there and he was like, "Isn't this amazing?" He's like, "Nowhere else in your life are you going to be surrounded by 30,000 of your colleagues." He's like, "Anybody who walks around here who doesn't feel as insignificant as an ant, there's something wrong with them." And that's stuck with me because I go, most everybody who's there is in the same bucket. You may walk around there going like, "Oh my God, I don't know anybody," or "I only know like two people and they're not even here with me and there's so many people." And everybody else is feeling some version of that. So I love your advice of like, just go and have fun. Like stop in some places. If you miss something, you'll get that other information. And I would just add to that by saying, just talk to people. Like just say hi to someone. Like they're going to be feeling the same thing. You can just fill up their bucket of, you know, internal happiness or joy or whatever, and confidence. And, you know, the more that you feel that and other people feel that, you'll be able to just relax and have a good time and get value from it.
Oh yeah, for sure, man. So, uh, the couple times I've gone, it's always during my birthday, which has always been kind of cool.
Yeah.
So that's always it's my birthday.
Yeah.
And having your go-to icebreakers are always very helpful. So, I mean, you could lie and say it's your birthday anyways, right? But
Sure.
being comfortable and even being uncomfortable and just kind of being comfortable, being uncomfortable
Yeah.
is a great thing, right?
That's great. Being comfortable, being uncomfortable. Like I think that's really important. I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I do too.
And then yeah, also check out the keynotes. Like sometimes there's really cool things that they share, like 10 years ago when they announced Lambda. So it'll be exciting to see what gets announced. And um yeah, I'm excited about that.
Oh yeah, post reInvent, there's going to be a ton of content and people way smarter than both you and I giving the rundown on
Sure. Yeah.
all the cool stuff that's coming out, right? So it'll definitely be worthwhile seeing all the recap and keynote speeches and all the documents that AWS will release themselves, right? So just keeping up to date with all the RSS feeds and all the different Google searches and however you keep up to date with all your information. I know my Google for you is going to definitely be this week at AWS reInvent here. So it'll be trying to parse through all that information and see all the cool things.
A lot. All right, John. I think we've hit it. Anything else you want to say?
No, looking forward to seeing any and all of you out there if I do make it out there. And if you do make it out to the Venetian 4 p.m. Monday, have a great time. Say hi to Ed for me. He's a great dude.
Yeah. Anybody who comes, you'll be more than welcome. We'd love to have you come by. And this is the first of many podcasts that we're doing. Tech Talk Together Tuesdays. And then and we'll even do it when I'm in Vegas and John is not, but that's the joy of technology, and we'll keep this going. So thanks everybody for tuning in. If you made it this far, and we'll be posting these again regularly. All right. Bye.
Later, Sean.